My revenge on my wife is not over yet, and there will be more.
Rain always sounded heavier when it hit the wooden porch. Maybe it was the hollow echo that made it feel personal, like the sky was trying to talk directly to my house to me. That night, the rain was relentless, blurring the world behind streaks on the window pane. The kind of rain that made the streetlights look like melting stars when I turned into the driveway. Headlights sliced across the familiar curve of our front yard. The maple tree shuddered under the wind, its leaves sticking to the glass door. My briefcase slid off the passenger seat as I parked. I didn't pick it up right away. I just sat there, engine idling, listening to the rhythmic tapping on the windshield. It felt easier to sit still than to go inside. Our house was dark except for a faint glow from the hallway lamp we always left on. The soft amber light leaking through the curtains looked comforting from the outside from the car. It still looked like home. But lately, that word had begun to lose shape. I stepped out, the cold cutting instantly through my shirt, the smell of wet earth and pine. Somewhere, a neighbor's wind chime clinked. Then I saw a small cardboard box on the front mat, soaked around the edges, but still sealed tight with clear tape. No return address. Just my name written in neat, almost formal handwriting, to Jonathan Miller. For a second, I thought maybe Emily ordered something she loved, surprise packages, little online finds. But this was addressed only to me. No sender, no smiley face on the note, no love you scribbled on the side like she usually did. Just my name, scented and sharp. I bent down, lifted it. Light. Too light for something ordinary. Maybe something delicate. It rattled faintly inside, like something made of glass or metal. Inside, I could already smell the faint trace of damp cardboard. I set it on the kitchen table, next to the vase of drooping tulips Emily had forgotten to replace. The silence in the house pressed close, broken only by the faint hum of the fridge. I peeled the tape slowly. Pulling it open, there was another box inside, smaller, wooden, polished, with a brass clasp. A music box. My first thought was that it looked antique, maybe mid-century. Someone must found it at a vintage store. The surface was engraved with a pattern of ivy leaves curling around a circle in the center. When I tilted it, something jingled faintly inside. And then there was a folded note in our envelope. Just one line on thick cream paper, written with the same careful hand as the label outside. Some gifts speak louder than words. For a moment, I smiled out of reflex, I guess. Maybe it was from a client, some quirky end-of-quarter thank you. But the handwriting looked strangely personal. I turned the small brass key at the bottom. It clicked softly, and a tune began to play. The melody was faint, hesitant, familiar, somehow a lullaby I couldn't place. The sound filled the kitchen, in waves, delicate but unsettling, like it didn't belong in this century. And then I noticed the faint, metallic smell that it wasn't from the wood or the brass. It was sharp, like wet iron. I hesitated before lifting the lid. Inside, on a bed of velvet, were photographs, 4 of them, printed on glossy paper, edges still crisp. In the first, Emily was laughing, head tilted, eyes closed, wind pulling her hair. The photo was candid, beautiful even, until I noticed the arm around her shoulders. The man beside her, his face half turned, wore a blue jacket I'd seen before. The second photo, same man, same smile. This time, his hand rested on the small of her back. Her fingers brushed his wrist, gentle, familiar. In the third, they stood by the waterfront downtown, city lights bending in the reflection behind them. Her head leaned against his shoulder. In the fourth, I didn't finish looking. I felt my throat close, and something inside my chest pulled tight, like every nerve decided to wake up at once. I dropped the photo back into the box. The melody kept playing, twisting the air around me. I stumbled back, catching the edge of the counter, but the room spun. The sound of the rain outside grew louder, almost violent against the windows. My hand brushed the tulips, knocking the vase to the floor, water spreading across the tiles, petals floating like bits of paper. The music slowed, winding down to silence. The last note hung in the air. Then I remember nothing. When I came to, the room was darker. My cheek pressed against the cold floor. I could hear the soft buzz of the refrigerator again, the dripping from the broken vase. I sat up slowly. My shirt clung to my skin. The music box still sat on the table, the lid half open, photographs askew. For a moment, I convinced myself it was a mistake, some kind of sick prank. Maybe I had generated images, a glitch, maybe someone trying to ruin me or her. I stood up, leaning against the counter, and turned on the overhead light. The brightness was too harsh, washing everything out. The photos gleamed wetly. I picked up one, holding it closer. The edges left faint black smudges on my fingers. I turned it over. There was something written on the back in pencil. Pier 6 May 17. The date. 2 weeks ago. I felt something shift in my stomach, that subtle drop when the ground beneath you gives way. 2 weeks ago. Emily said she was at a team event. I remembered because she texted me late that night. Running late, don't wait up. Love you. I still had the message. I looked again at the man's face. It was clear now, even under the sheen of the photograph. Austin Reeves. I knew him. He was a contractor. Worked with our firm for the last quarter. Sharp, charismatic, always too confident for someone on a temporary deal. Everyone liked him. Emily had introduced him at a company event. Just business, she'd said when I teased her once about how often he came up in conversation. Now, here he was, wrapped around her in 4 glassy reminders. The air felt thin. I opened a window, but the rain pushed harder, sending cold droplets onto the sill. I could smell ozone and damp wood. I grabbed my phone, almost on instinct, typing metadata photo into the search bar. My hands were trembling. I checked the file info. The date, location, everything matched. No edits, no signs of fabrication. Real.it was all real. I sat down at the table, the wood still wet from the vase, and just stared at the photos. My thoughts weren't sentences anymore, just static flashes of memory. Her laugh that morning, the way she kissed my cheek distractedly before leaving for work. The refrigerator hum seemed louder now, filling the silence with something mechanical, heartless. Then headlights flashed through the curtains her car. I shoved everything back into the box, snapping it shut, and slid it into the cabinet under the sink. My pulse was racing. I forced myself to breathe evenly. The door opened, followed by the sound of her heels on the floor. John? I turned, leaning casually against the counter. Hey. She smiled, that same easy, practiced smile she used with clients. I didn't expect you home so early. Yeah. Meeting ended sooner. She set her purse down, shook the rain from her coat, and glanced around. Why is it so quiet in here? I guess the rain drowned out everything. She laughed softly, moving closer. The smell of her perfume mixed with the damp air. I could almost forget the box beneath the sink. The photos pressed together like evidence waiting to breathe. How was your day? She asked. Uneventful, I said. Yours? Busy. Same as always, I nodded. The rhythm of our conversation was so normal it felt surreal. Like we were both performing a scene from a script neither of us remembered rehearsing. She moved to pour herself water, glancing at the shards of the broken vase on the floor. What happened here? I dropped it, I said too quickly. My fault. Those tulips were barely hanging on anyway. She smiled, sweeping the pieces with a towel, completely unaware of how fragile the air between us had become. When she turned her back, I caught my reflection in the window, pale, tense, eyes hollow. A man rehearsing calmness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside her, listening to her steady breathing, the rain's soft percussion on the roof. I stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster like constellations. My mind replayed the same for photographs, looping endlessly, like a projector jammed on one reel. I kept asking myself the same useless questions. Why me? Who sent it? What did they want? And then why now? The next morning, I woke early. She was still asleep, her phone on the nightstand, screen dimmed. I stared at it for a long moment before looking away. Downstairs, I opened the cabinet, pulled out the box again. The wood felt colder now, heavier somehow. I turned the key once more. The melody began again, soft, deliberate, almost mocking. I took the note out. Some gifts speak louder than words. I flipped it over. There was faint embossing on the corner. LL Designs. That name stirred something. I'd seen it before, stamped on the packaging of event supplies at the office. Emily's department used them for corporate decor orders. I sat back slowly, the realization settling in. Whoever sent this knew exactly where I worked, and more, they wanted me to find that connection. I took out my phone, typed LL Design Seattle. The address popped up near the waterfront. I almost laughed. Of course. Near Pier 6. The same location on the photo. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the air crisp, the city washed clean. I grabbed my jacket, the box, and headed for the door. But before leaving, I stopped by the hallway mirror. I barely recognized myself, eyes sunken, jaw tight, tie crooked. I adjusted it automatically, then realized I had no meeting to attend, just questions to ask. The shopfront was tucked between a bookstore and a CAF. Easy to miss unless you knew where to look. The bell above the door chimed softly as I entered. The woman behind the counter looked up. Middle-aged, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Linda. They smelled faintly of varnish and cedar. Can I help you? She asked. I think someone ordered this from you, I said, setting the music box on the counter. Her eyebrows lifted. Oh, that's one of ours, yes. Lovely engraving. Do you need a replacement key? No, I hesitated. Could you tell me who bought it? She gave a polite, practiced smile. I am afraid I can't share customer information, sir, even if it's about a mistake. Her smile faltered. What kind of mistake? I leaned closer, lowering my voice. This was delivered to my home yesterday. No return address. Inside were photographs that shouldn't exist. Her expression shifted from politeness to concern. Oh dear. She opened a ledger, flipping through pages. Do you happen to know when it might have been ordered? I shook my head. Let's see. We only sold 3 of this particular design this month. Her finger stopped on an entry. This one was picked up in person. No shipping label. Name? She hesitated again. Glancing at me, I met her eyes. Please, I just need to understand, she sighed, lowering her voice. It was under the name Miss C. Reeves. The sound of that name made something inside me click into place, a sharp, metallic lock finding its match. Austin Reeves. I thanked her quietly and walked out. The bell chiming behind me like an echo outside. The clouds were breaking apart, letting slivers of sunlight through. The reflection of the bay shimmered between the parked cars. Everything looked so ordinary, so alive, while inside me something essential was rearranging itself into silence. I sat in the car for a long time, the music box beside me. The note replayed in my mind. Some gifts speak louder than words. It wasn't just a message. It was a performance, a declaration, and for the first time since opening that box, I wasn't angry. Not exactly. I felt something else. Cold, steady, dangerous in its calm, because whoever wanted me to see this, they'd made one mistake. They assumed I would break, but I didn't. I was only beginning to listen. It had been 6 days since I walked out of that shop with the music box in the passenger seat beside me. 6 days of pretending nothing was wrong. 6 days of perfect small talk, measured smiles, and polite nods to a woman I could barely look at without hearing that soft, mocking melody in my head. I learned quickly that silence can be the most convincing disguise. When you say too much, people notice the tremor in your voice. When you say too little, they assume you're just tired. And everyone at work already believed that I was tired, another architect in a fintech machine, pushing through endless updates and release deadlines. So I let them believe it. I let everyone believe it. Emily still kissed my cheek before leaving for the office, still texted me at lunch about her crazy day and impossible clients, but she never mentioned Austin Reeves again. Not once. Not even when his name came up in meetings. That was what told me everything. That carefully avoided silence where his name should have been. A gap so wide it felt deliberate. By Wednesday, I started keeping notes. Nothing dramatic, just observations in the margins of my planner. 9:12 a.m. Austin arrives late again. 10:30 Emily leaves her desk for coffee. Doesn't come back for 25 minutes. 2:17 Austin in her office. Door closed. 2:41 door opens. Both smiling. It wasn't evidence yet. It was routine disguised as curiosity. But routine has patterns, and patterns are just secrets waiting for structure. I told myself I wasn't spying, I was confirming. That word felt cleaner somehow, less pathetic. Confirmation. It sounded like data, not emotion. The truth is, I needed structure. Chaos is bearable only when it can be mapped. That Friday, we had an all-hands meeting in the glass conference room overlooking downtown. The rain had started again, soft and steady, the city smeared into silver beyond the windows. The kind of rain that erased the edges of things. Austin sat 3 chairs away from me. He leaned back casually, his jacket draped over the chair behind him, hair slightly damp from the walk in. The man radiated ease, that effortless confidence that comes from believing you're untouchable. Emily sat opposite me, scrolling through her phone, pretending not to notice him. I pretended not to notice either of them. The meeting itself was noise charts, projections, words like scalability and integration. I nodded when people expected me to nod. My hands stayed perfectly still on the table. Then Austin spoke. We've been refining the campaign visuals. I think Emily's insight really took it to the next level. Her head lifted slightly, and she smiled that professional, poised smile. Thank you, Austin. Something inside me tightened. Not anger, exactly. More like gravity had pulled downward, heavy and inevitable, sitting there. Surrounded by colleagues and the hum of air conditioning, I realized something simple and precise. No one else in the room saw what I saw. To them, this was just collaboration. Two co-workers exchanging compliments. Ordinary. Forgettable. Me. It was evidence. After the meeting, as people dispersed, I lingered near the coffee machine, waiting. Austin walked out first, phone in hand, whistling quietly. Emily followed 2 minutes later. They didn't leave together, but I noticed how her pace slowed as she passed the elevator, as if listening for footsteps behind her. By the time I reached the parking garage that evening, my decision was already made. I wasn't going to confront her. Not yet. I was going to build a record. A quiet, meticulous record that no one could refute. That weekend, Emily had a client brunch. She left in a bright red coat I hadn't seen her wear in months. I waited until her car disappeared down the street, then went upstairs to her home office. The drawers were neat, organized into labeled folders. Invoices, event plans, vendor contracts. The kind of order that only someone confident in their control maintains. I wasn't looking for something scandalous. I was looking for a trail, something small, accidental. Bureaucratic. It didn't take long. Buried under a stack of vendor receipts was an email printout from LL Designs, the same name embossed on the bottom of the music box. The message was short. Order confirmed for pickup. Design. Ivy engraving. Payment received. No signature. No note. Just a date. 2 days before the package arrived at my house. So Austin hadn't just bought it. He'd used her corporate account. A small mistake, but a fatal one. I took a photo of the printout with my phone, then placed it exactly as I'd found it. Every detail matters when you're quietly building the truth. That night, she came home cheerful, almost glowing. Brunch went well, she said, slipping her shoes off by the door. They loved the pitch. Might double our budget for next quarter. That's great, I said evenly. She smiled, kissed my cheek, then walked upstairs humming softly. When I heard the shower running, I sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the photo of the email. The date glowed on the screen. 2 days before. That was all the confirmation I needed. The next morning, I backed up everything, the photos from the box, the metadata files, the image of that printout into a hidden drive. If you're going to expose something, you can't afford to lose control of your own evidence. By Monday, I was ready to speak with HR. The HR director, Sarah Chang, was known for 2 things: quiet efficiency and zero tolerance for drama. If there was a rule, she enforced it. If there was a gray area, she filed it into black and white until it fit company policy. Her office was minimalist pale wood, a single plant, and a digital clock that never stopped ticking. She looked up as I entered. "Jonathan, come in." I closed the door behind me, careful to keep my tone neutral. "Sarah, I need to report a possible conflict of interest." She adjusted her glasses. "Between you and?" "Not me. Between my wife, Emily Miller, and a contractor, Austin Reeves." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "Go on." I took a breath. "She's been managing a project where he's directly involved. They've been spending significant of hours together. I don't have proof of professional misconduct yet. But you believe there's a personal relationship that might compromise impartiality?" "Yes." She nodded once, expression unreadable. "Do you have any supporting documentation?" "I do. Dates, emails, and a receipt showing she processed a personal purchase through her vendor account." Sarah leaned back. "I see. That would fall under misuse of company resources. Thank you for bringing it to my attention." There was a pause. That long, assessing pause HR people use to gauge what's unsaid. "May I ask why you're the one reporting this, Jonathan?" "Because no one else will," I said simply. She studied me a moment longer, then nodded. "We'll handle this discreetly. I'll initiate a standard audit. You'll receive no further involvement unless required." "Understood." As I stood to leave, she added, "These situations are sensitive. Keep professional distance, especially from the involved parties." I almost laughed. "That won't be a problem." Walking back to my desk, I felt lighter. Not better, never that, but purposeful. Like I'd finally shifted the weight of my chest and onto the scales of procedure for the first time in a week. I could breathe. That afternoon, I saw Sarah meet briefly with Emily outside the conference room. Their expressions were polite, practiced, but Emily's hand trembled slightly as she tucked her hair behind her. By evening, she was distant. Over dinner, she picked at her food, barely speaking. When I asked if everything was okay, She forced a smile. Just tired. Meetings all day. I nodded, matching her lie with silence. 2 nights later, she got a call in the living room. Her tone was clipped, defensive. I caught fragments. No, I didn't approve it. We'll discuss it tomorrow. This isn't fair. When she hung up, she stood by the window for a long time, her reflection blurred by the glass. I stayed in the kitchen, pretending to read, pretending not to know. By Friday, the office was buzzing. Rumors always travel faster than official emails. Someone mentioned a vendor audit. Someone else whispered about irregularities in expense logs. No one said names, but everyone had theories. I watched from my desk as Austin moved through the office. His charm dimmed, his smile slightly forced. He was still performing, but the rhythm was of the small cracks showing. At noon, Sarah's assistant came for him. HR needs you for a few minutes. He didn't look at me as he walked past, but I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that hums before a storm breaks. For the rest of the day, the office was quieter. People typed slower, laughed less. The usual chatter dissolved into a low, uneasy murmur. When I passed Emily's office later, her chair was empty, her laptop closed. Only her nameplate remained, tilted slightly to one side. By the time I got home that evening, she was already there, sitting on the couch, shoes still on, staring at nothing. They started an audit, she said flatly. I pretended surprise. Really? She nodded, eyes fixed on the carpet. Someone reported that I mishandled a vendor relationship. They're saying I approved purchases outside of protocol. But I didn't. I mean, not intentionally. Her voice wavered on the last word. What happens now? I asked softly. They're reviewing the logs. If it's nothing, it'll blow over. She paused. But if they find something? She didn't finish. For the first time in days, I felt pity, small, fragile, almost nostalgic. She looked smaller somehow, like someone who'd been carrying a secret too long and was finally paying for it. I wanted to tell her I knew, that I'd seen everything, that I'd already forgiven her, in a way not for what she did, but for underestimating me. Instead, I said, it'll work out. You're good at your job. She gave a weak smile. Thanks, John. That night, I couldn't sleep again. But it wasn't the same kind of sleeplessness. It wasn't fear this time. It was calculation, quiet, precise satisfaction mixed with something emptier. I lay there listening to the rain tapping against the window, steady as a clock. For once, the melody in my head wasn't from the music box. It was the rhythm of order returning on Sunday morning. I made coffee and opened my laptop. I still had the photos, the metadata, the printout. I also had the email trail confirming the corporate payment to LL Designs. Everything was catalogued neatly in a folder labeled Archive 1. The name felt too clinical for what it contained. But maybe that was the point. Detachment is cleaner than revenge. T9. My phone buzzed a message from Sarah. Jonathan, thank you for your cooperation. The audit has been completed. Action will be taken early this week. This information remains confidential. I stared at the screen for a long time. The rain outside softened into mist. Emily came downstairs in her robe, rubbing her eyes. You're up early. Couldn't sleep, I said. She poured coffee, her movements slow, deliberate. You know what's strange? I keep thinking I did everything right. Every form, every approval. But somehow there's always something you miss. A small thing that changes everything. Her words hung in the air like smoke. She didn't look at me when she said them. I wanted to tell her that she was right, that small things are what change everything. But not in the way she thought. Instead, I said, maybe it's a good thing. Sometimes we need a reminder to pay attention. She gave a faint, tired laugh. Yeah, I guess. She sipped her coffee in silence, staring out the window at the grey skyline. Her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost of the woman I used to know, familiar, but fading, and just for a second, I almost felt the urge to reach out, to end it cleanly, honestly, humanly. But honesty is a luxury you can't afford when the truth still has work to do. So I sat there, watching the rain blur the city beyond the glass, listening to the faint hum of the refrigerator again, steady and indifferent. That sound had become the background music of my life, constant, unfeeling, methodical. By noon, she left for errands. I watched her car pull away, the red coat bright against the pale morning, when the house was quiet again. I went to the cabinet, opened it, and looked at the music box. It sat there, innocent and polished, as if it hadn't changed everything. I wound the key one last time. The tune began the same delicate, haunting melody, notes falling like raindrops in reverse. This time, though, it didn't sound mocking. It sounded like a confession, a soft, wordless admission that some truths don't destroy you, they simply rearrange what's left. And as the last note faded, I closed the lid gently. My reflection caught for a moment in the brass glass, pale, steady, almost serene. I knew what I had to do next, but that was a plan for another day. For now, the silence was enough, and for the first time in weeks, the house finally felt still. Monday morning felt unusually bright, the kind of light that exaggerates every reflection. The city looked cleaner after the weekend rain, the sky pale and empty. There was no sense of relief in it, only exposure. Every color too sharp, every sound too clear. When I arrived at the office, I noticed the shift immediately. Conversations loud as people passed me in the hallway, not out of fear, but that quiet curiosity that comes before a secret turns into gossip. I knew that rhythm. I had heard it before: hushed tones, nervous glances, the sound of people pretending not to know something they absolutely knew. Emily wasn't at her desk. Austin wasn't either. The HR wing's door was closed, blinds drawn. Through the frosted glass, shadows moved slowly back and forth. For a moment, I stood there, coffee cooling in my hand, watching the outlines shift like figures in a play. I didn't need to see their faces. I already knew who was in there. I turned and walked back to my office. My monitor hummed to life, screens filled with lines of code and diagrams that suddenly looked meaningless. There's something about betrayal that makes the ordinary world feel like an illusion. Numbers, tasks, conversations, all thin layers covering something deeper. Around noon, Sarah Chang called me in. Her tone on the phone was the same as always, measured, professional, never revealing too much. "Jonathan, could you step into my office for a few minutes?" Inside, the air smelled faintly of citrus cleaner. She gestured to the chair opposite her desk. "Thank you for coming. I wanted to update you briefly." I nodded. Sitting down, "The audit confirmed a breach of policy," she said. "The vendor contract managed by Emily Miller and Austin Reeves shows irregular authorization. Additionally, confidential materials were transferred without proper clearance." Her words were careful, almost mechanical, as if she'd rehearsed them many times. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "Disciplinary review," she said. "The contractor's agreement is being terminated. Internal measures will follow for employees involved. I can't share further details." I nodded again. I didn't need more details. I'd written the ending myself days ago. Before I left, she added, "I appreciate the professionalism with which you handled this. Most people wouldn't have been so composed." I managed a small smile. Experience teaches you composure. As I walked out, I saw Austin at the reception desk, signing papers. His smile was gone. His shoulders slumped, his jacket draped over one arm like a flag after a storm. Emily stood near the window, arms crossed tightly, face pale but unreadable. He said something to her quietly. She didn't answer when Sarah stepped out to escort him. Austin glanced up briefly. Our eyes met across the lobby. No anger, no regret, just a flash of something colder. Calculation, maybe. A kind of recognition. He nodded once, as if acknowledging a game lost but not finished, then walked out without looking back. The automatic doors hissed shut behind him. The sound echoed longer than it should have. That evening, Emily came home late. I was sitting at the table, half pretending to read a report. She placed her keys down softly, her expression somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. "They let him go," she said after a moment. I looked up, feigning mild surprise. "I heard." Her voice cracked just slightly. "They said I violated protocol. They suspended me. I might lose my position." I said nothing. I let the silence stretch until it filled the room. "John, I didn't mean for any of this." She stopped herself. "It just got out of control, did it?" She winced, eyes glistening in the dim light. "You don't understand." I closed the laptop slowly. "I understand more than you think." Her breath hitched. For a second, I thought she'd say it, admit it outright, but she didn't. She just turned away, gripping the edge of the counter like it was the only thing holding her upright. "I need some time to think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need," I said. My tone was calm, almost gentle. It was the calm that comes after the storm, when destruction already lies scattered, and there's nothing left to fear. She went upstairs. I heard drawers opening, then closing, a suitcase unzipped. I didn't stop her. Be wide the time she came down again. Coat on, eyes red but dry. I was still at the table. "Where will you go?" I asked. "Hotel for now. Maybe my sister's later." "All right." She hesitated near the door. "I never wanted to hurt you. I nodded. You just didn't want to be caught. Her lips parted, but no words came. She turned and left. The door clicked softly behind her. For a long time, I just sat there, listening to the sound of the refrigerator hum and the rain beginning again outside. When I finally stood, the silence in the house was vast, clean, unfamiliar. Tuesday came and went like a scene on repeat. Emails, calls, routine chatter. The world outside moved on as if nothing extraordinary had happened. That's the cruelest part about truth. It changes everything for you and absolutely nothing for anyone else. Late that afternoon, I met Sarah in the elevator. She gave a polite nod. Things have been resolved, she said. I wanted you to know, thank you. I said, as the doors opened to her floor. She added quietly, you did the right thing, Jonathan. The right thing. The phrase echoed strangely. It sounded moral, clean, clinical. But rightness is a flexible concept. What's right depends on who's writing the report. That night, I went home early. The house was still empty. A faint scent of Emily's perfume lingered in the hallway, blending with the smell of rain-soaked hair on the counter. I noticed something new, a letter in her handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. John, it began. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to understand. But please believe that I didn't set out to betray you. Things just happened, and I was too weak to stop them. I thought I wanted excitement, but all I feel now is regret. I'm leaving for a while. Maybe you'll find peace. Maybe I will too. It wasn't a confession. It was an apology without ownership. Words carefully arranged to sound human while staying safe. I folded the letter back into the envelope, placed it on the table beside the cold coffee cup she'd left behind. Peace. That was the word she'd used. Peace isn't silence. It's clarity. It's the absence of uncertainty. And I already had that. 2 days later, I was called to a follow-up meeting about project continuity without Emily and Austin. The campaign needed restructuring. I arrived early, standing by the window overlooking the street below. People moved like streams of light beneath umbrellas. Detached, orderly. The conference room filled slowly. Sarah, 2 department heads, and our legal consultant, Michael Stone. I'd seen him before in company memos, but never in person. He was a calm man, deliberate, with eyes that seemed to weigh words before they were spoken. Mr. Miller, he greeted, shaking my hand. We'll need your input on the transition process, of course. The discussion was routine, procedural, until Sarah mentioned the termination clause. The contractor's actions breached confidentiality. We're pursuing a legal settlement. I looked up, pretending curiosity. Settlement? Michael nodded. Yes, misuse of proprietary material. It's fairly straightforward, though the defendant's attorney is already trying to negotiate. Defendant, I repeated softly, tasting the word. Yes. Mr. Reeves, it appears he used company visuals in external materials without clearance. That's enough for a breach. I realized then that the music box wasn't just personal humiliation, it was corporate evidence. He'd used their design files, their materials. What had begun as his joke had become his undoing. I signed the documents they handed me. Initials in neat corners, each stroke of the pen a quiet punctuation marked .by the time the meeting ended. My coffee had gone cold again. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight filtered through the clouds in fractured beams, glinting off glass buildings. Everything looked clean again. Too clean. That evening, I went to the pier. Not Pier 6, where the photographs had been taken, just the one near the old ferry dock. Quieter, less crowded. The water was calm, the surface reflecting streaks of orange and silver. I sat on a bench, watching waves roll against the pylons. For a while, I didn't think about anything. I just listened to the water, then I pulled the music box from my pocket. It felt heavier now, its edges damp from the mist. I turned the key once slowly. The melody began thin, trembling, somehow more fragile in the open air. A couple passed behind me, laughing softly. The sound of their footsteps faded into the distance. I remembered the night I found the box, the way the melody had filled the kitchen with unease. Now it sounded almost mournful, like it had lost its own purpose. I opened the lid and looked at the photos again, creased now from being handled too often. Faces I once loved, moments I couldn't unsee. I let the wind catch them one by one. They fluttered over the edge of the pier, landing gently on the surface before drifting away. For a long time, I watched until they disappeared into the shimmer of the water. I didn't feel triumph, not satisfaction either, just stillness. Maybe that's all closure really is, the moment you stop expecting a different ending when the last note of the melody faded. I closed the lid carefully, wiped the moisture from the wood, and slipped it back into my coat. The air was cold, the kind that makes every breath visible. I stayed there until the lights of the city began to blur into dusk. Then I stood, buttoned my coat, and walked back toward the car. Halfway there, my phone buzzed a message from Sarah. Jonathan, the settlement's confirmed. Both parties informed. HR considers the case closed. Please delete all related files from your archive. I stared at the message for a while, the screen reflecting on the wet pavement like a mirror. Delete all related files.it was the right instruction, the clean one. But truth doesn't vanish with deletion. It stays somewhere in the corners of memory, in the pause before sleep, in the way you start doubting laughter that comes too easily. I slipped the phone back into my pocket that night. As I drove home through the quiet streets, the city lights flickered across the windshield like ghosts. Every reflection seemed to whisper something unfinished. When I reached the house, the first thing I noticed was the faint smell of her perfume again, drifting from the hallway. Maybe it was in the walls now, or maybe it was my mind refusing to let go. The letter still sat on the table where I'd left it. The envelope had curled slightly at the edges from the humidity. I didn't open it again. I just placed the music box beside it, like a pair of matched bookends to a story that no longer needed telling. The house was quiet, perfectly, eerily quiet. I turned off the lights, leaving only the glow from the street lamp filtering through the blinds dot in that half-light. Everything looked softer, less certain, almost merciful. And for the first time since all of it began, I felt something that could almost be called peace, not happiness, not relief, just the absence of noise, the absence of pretending tomorrow would bring whatever it wanted. But tonight, at least, belonged entirely to silence, and silence, I'd learned, can be the most honest sound in the world. The courthouse looked like every courthouse I had ever passed without really seeing square, careful, indifferent. It was an ordinary Wednesday morning, clear light, a steady breeze that lifted the flags and set them down again as if the day itself were nodding yes, yes, yes. People moved in and out carrying folders, wearing shoes that knew how to move softly in hallways. Voices lowered by habit in rooms designed for measured sentences. Michael Stone walked beside me, one hand on a leather portfolio, the other tucked in his coat pocket. Calm, deliberate. In the elevator, he didn't give a speech. He didn't talk about outcomes or righteousness or victory. He only said, "You don't need to say much." Precision travels farther than emotion. The doors slid open with a sigh. Family courtrooms are smaller than the ones in shows. The windows are higher, the air cooler, the light less dramatic. The judge sat like a clock at the far end present. Not personal, stacked files on one side, a pitcher of water on the other. A calendar day, a list of lives. Ours among them, wedged between a 9:30 continuance and a 10 o'clock stipulation. Emily was already seated. She kept her eyes on the table, hands folded, a plain blouse under a blazer that didn't quite fit. For a moment, I remembered the red coat, the perfume in the hallway, the tulips drooping in the kitchen. Then the memory dissolved, as if the room itself separated the past into tidy envelopes and placed them out of reach. Our case was called. We stood. The judge greeted counsel, glanced through the paperwork, and began. The tone was steady, the words careful, the rhythm impersonal. A signature here, a confirmation there, the structure of an ending. Michael spoke for me when needed. Irreconcilable differences. Property division per exhibit bien. No-minded children. Terms that turned years into columns and lines. I watched the pen in the judge's hand move cleanly across the page. It felt like listening to a mechanic describe the repair of an engine I had once thought of as a heart. When the judge asked if I understood the terms, I said, "Yes, Your Honor." The words emerged without friction, like they had been waiting behind my teeth. Emily's voice was softer when it was her turn, steady but translucent. "Yes, Your Honor." She didn't look at me. We were almost finished when the judge paused. Both parties acknowledge they have exchanged required disclosures and produced all relevant communications. Michael answered for me. "We have." Her attorney, a precise man with an efficient tie, answered the same. The judge initialed a page and nodded. "Then we are concluded. Decree will be entered this afternoon." It took less time than a coffee break outside the courtroom. People moved past us toward their own beginnings and endings. Michael shook my hand. "I will email confirmation and next steps for the property transfer." "You handled this well." He meant I kept my voice level and my face still. The performance of composure. The only scene I could play without rehearsal. When he left, I stood at the window overlooking the parking lot. The sun had climbed high, flattening shadows. I watched a woman help her son with a seatbelt. I watched a man pat his jacket for his keys. In another life, I might have envied their ordinary concerns. Today, I felt nothing. Or maybe nothing is simply what calm feels like once it stops. Pretending to be something else, I turned to go and almost collided with her. "John," her voice held the surprise of my name as if she had found it where she didn't expect to. We stood too close to pretend we hadn't seen each other. For a breath, we were just two people who had shared a kitchen and a calendar and a life. "I'm not here to make a scene," she said quickly, as if reading a warning that wasn't there. I wanted to speak to you, if you'll let me." In the corner of the hallway sat a row of chairs under a print of a lighthouse that had never guided anyone here. We took the two at the end. "I'm sorry," she began. The words felt like small stones into a shallow pool, not in the way that changes anything. "I know that. I'm just sorry," I nodded. There wasn't much left to say about apologies. They do their work somewhere else or not at all. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "They showed me documents, messages. During discovery." She looked down at her hands. "I signed a statement. I waited. It wasn't just him," she said. The sentence seemed to close a door behind us. "The box, the note. He sent it, yes. But I told him what to write. I gave him your full address." I wanted to force a conversation, but I didn't know what I was asking for until it was too late. The hallway hummed with distant footsteps. A copier clicked and whirred. My mouth was dry, but my pulse didn't race. I had expected something like this without letting myself name it. "Some gifts speak louder than words," I said evenly. She winced. "I used to say that when we couldn't find presents for birthdays. Remember? I thought if you saw, you'd finally talk to me." Really talk. Not just the scheduling, the bills, the leftover emails at night. "And did you?" "What? Talk to me?" Before any of this, she swallowed, the muscle in her jaw flickering once. "I tried in my own way." "It was a bad way." I studied the lighthouse print. "It was all light and no shore." "They suspended you." She nodded. "I resigned yesterday." A quiet breath. "He called me last week from a new number. Wanted to blame someone. I told him to stop calling." "You won't believe that, but it's true. Belief, I wanted to say, is no longer a currency here. Instead, I said, take care of yourself." She looked at me like I had offered something heavier than kindness. "You too," she said. A pause. "I hope you find something that belongs to you alone." We stood at the same time, and for a second we were close enough that I could see the faintest line at the edge of her eyes. A seam time had stitched there while I was busy debugging systems and learning the reliable language of architecture. She turned first and walked down the hall, shoulders squared, the sound of her steps absorbed by carpet and distance. Outside, the wind had picked up, threading through the trees that lined the street. I walked to my car and sat with my hands on the steering wheel until the air in the cabin warmed to something human. Michael's email arrived before I reached home. Subject line: final. The body was short recorded, effective today. Property schedule attached. A second email from him followed, flagged urgent. He had forwarded an attachment from opposing counsel that had arrived late. Supplemental production text message extracts. His note was 5 words. "For your awareness." No response needed. I pulled into a quiet lot near the waterfront and opened the file on my phone. There it was, preserved in grey bubbles and timestamps, the digital handwriting of a past that had travelled farther than it deserved. Her text: "Some gifts speak louder than words." 2 days before the package arrived. Attached, my address, the hours we usually got home, a request for something he can't ignore. There were other messages. Logistics. A set of photos attached with a comment about how the light at the pier makes everything look honest. Seeing the words didn't change what I already knew, but it relocated it, as if the truth had moved from a room to a ledger, from a fork to a line item. I closed the file and sat very still. Seagulls rose and settled on a rail. A ferry horn sounded distant and soft, like a memory remembering itself. Across the street, a small law office had a display of framed certificates on the wall. I watched them catch the sun as it shifted. When light hits glass at the right angle, you can see everything and nothing in the reflection at once, your face suspended in someone else's achievements. For years, I had been content to be the reflection, the reliable shape behind the shine. Somewhere between a lullaby in a kitchen and a message preserved by an opposing counsel. That changed. I drove home with the windows cracked open to let the cold air erase the inside of the car. The living room smelled neutral now, a faint trace of wood polish and something like paper. The envelope she'd left had been filed away by time. It no longer waited on the table to be reconsidered. On the shelf, the music box sat where I had placed it beside the letter the night before the Pierce small, polished patient. I picked it up, turned it in my hands. The engraving of ivy around a small circle, the brass glass catching a small square of afternoon light. I wound the key a quarter turn. The melody rose softly, hesitant, as if it were remembering how to be a melody. The sound entered the room and made it smaller, more precise, outlining edges the way chalk outlines the field before a game begins. When the tune found its shape, I opened the lid and looked inside. There was nothing there anymore, no photographs, no note. Only the tiny mechanism working because it had been told to. I listened until the final note held itself as long as it could and then let go. The silence after felt like a decision the room made on my behalf. I closed the lid, set the box back on the shelf, and began to gather what I wanted to keep. It surprised me how little that was 2 framed photographs of a coastline without people in it. A mug from a conference where I had solved a problem no one but 3 colleagues remembered. A sweater my mother insisted looked good on me, though I never wore it in public. I slid files from the cabinet into a single cardboard box, labeled in my half-careful handwriting. Office, living. When I was done, the house looked like the first part of a rehearsal. The stage set with only the pieces that mattered to the scene. By the time the sun lowered behind the maple tree in the yard, I had arranged a small stack of packages by the door. The rest I would deal with later. I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a single page of paper that said nothing yet. Words come easier when they're allowed to be simple. Dear Emily, I wrote. I stopped, crossed out dear, and wrote her name alone. I told her the basics, the confirmation, the timeline for the transfer, the items I would leave, the items I would take. Then, because honesty is only useful if it isn't a trap, I wrote something I hadn't planned to. Thank you for telling me the truth today. Not for the act itself, but for the clarity it finally gave me. I don't carry anger. I carry distance. It suits me better. I did not mention the messages. I did not mention the note or the phrase that had threaded itself through our history, first as a gentle joke, then as an edge. Some objects don't deserve a museum. They deserve the ordinary dark of a closed drawer. I folded the letter and slid it into an envelope, left it on the table where the tulips had once been. No flowers now, just paper. A new apartment would be ready at the end of the week. Not far, but the kind of distance you feel in your step. High windows, bare floors, a living room with a view of roofs and chimneys, and, on clear days, a ribbon of water at the edge of the frame. I had seen it once and known it would be enough space where my thoughts wouldn't echo against old narratives. On my last night in the house, the neighborhood was unusually quiet. The porch light threw a clean circle on the steps. I stood at the threshold with the music box in one hand and my keys in the other. I wound it once and let the melody step into the evening air like a hesitant guest. The notes moved into the maple leaves and then into the street, where I imagined they thinned into nothing. When it finished, I placed the box in a bag with a few other things to donate, hesitated, then took it back out. It didn't feel like something to pass along to another pair of hands. Some objects aren't suited to fresh starts. They're built to finish something, and then stop in the morning. I drove to a recycling center, the kind with neat bins and polite signage. I set the music box in the wood container and rested my hand on it for a breath. Some gifts speak louder than words, I said softly, not as a memory, but as a farewell. The brass caught a last square of sun and went dull. I closed the lid on the bean and stood there, hands on the edge, until my palms remembered how to let go on the way to the new apartment. I stopped at a hardware store and bought nothing more symbolic than a box of hooks and a small hammer. I liked the idea that the first sound in the new space would be something functional. The building smelled like fresh paint and the faintest trace of someone else's coffee. When I opened the door, the light of the windows fell across the floor in long, clean rectangles. The rooms were empty, but not hollow. They felt like the inside of a sentence I had been rewriting for weeks. I carried the box labeled office, living to the kitchen, and unpacked the mug first, setting it by the sink. It looked almost ceremonial there. Next, the 2 photographs. Coastline, horizon line, water the color of slate. I placed one on the mantel and leaned the other against the wall where a bookshelf would go. When I stepped back, they made the room feel aware of its edges. The last thing I pulled from the box was a small notebook I hadn't intended to keep. Inside were the notes from that week of pretending arrivals, departures, door closings, elevator pauses. I stood with it in my hand, the paper as thin as it had felt then. I flipped to the first page. 9:12 a.m. Austin arrives late again. I read down the list and found myself saying aloud softly, "This isn't who I am anymore." I tore out the pages carefully, folded them once, then once again, and set the small square on the counter. I didn't throw it away. Not yet. Let something sit in the light before you decide whether they belong to the dark. That evening, I walked to the corner CAF. The barista wore an orange bandana and spoke to each customer like she had already met them once and wanted to confirm they were real. I took a table by the window where I could see the river of people on the sidewalk, small narratives brushing past each other without colliding. I opened my laptop out of habit and then closed it again. The noise of cups and milk frothers and chairs testing the floorboards was enough. My phone buzzed on the table. A message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on the new place." For a second, I thought it might be her. Then I saw the signature Michael. He had a way of finding the line between personal and professional without stepping on either side too long. He added, "If you need a recommendation for a therapist, I can refer. No charge." I smiled despite myself. The man treated people like systems worth optimizing. I replied, "Thank you. I have someone in mind." When I left the CAF, the sky was deep blue tipped with silver at the edges. I walked without choosing a direction and let the city arrange itself around me. At a bookstore, I bought a small collection of essays by someone who knew how to make precision feel like a kind of kindness. At a grocery store, I bought eggs and a single apple. At a florist folding paper around pale irises. I almost stepped in, then didn't. The tulips had had their say. Back in the apartment, I sat on the floor with my back against the couch I didn't have yet and read until the light poured itself off the furniture and left the room to the lamps. The words were clean, unexcited by themselves. I felt my shoulders drop, my jaw unclench. I stayed there a long time until the room, and I agreed that it was night, before sleep. I opened the notebook again and turned to a blank page. I wrote a date. Then I wrote one sentence. Today, I did not rehearse my own life. I closed the notebook and put it on the windowsill. The city hummed its ordinary song outside, the kind I had once mistaken for indifference. It was something gentler than that, more like a prelude, a quiet reminder that life doesn't clap for you when you enter a room. It just makes space. In the morning, I brewed coffee in a pot that belonged to this kitchen and stood at the window while it finished. The river at the edge of the view caught the sun and straightened itself into a bright line. I leaned my forehead against the glass for a second, then lifted it, leaving the faintest mark that vanished as the pain warmed. I thought about the phrase that had followed me through these weeks. Some gifts speak louder than words. Maybe, but maybe the better truth is smaller. Some silences say exactly what you need to hear if you stop trying to fill them. I took my mug to the table, opened the laptop, and began to write a message, not to Emily, not to HR, not to an attorney, to myself. It wasn't sentimental or grand. It was a list, a new set of routines, walks, therapy, calling my sister on Sundays, reading in the evenings instead of refreshing the same 3 sites until time dissolved, cooking something that took longer than a microwave expects, meeting friends I had quietly let drift to the bottom. I wrote, buy a plant, try to keep it alive. I closed the laptop. The room held its breath and then released it. On my way out the door, I glanced at the counter where the folded square of paper those notes from the week of pretending rested like an artifact. I picked it up, weighed it with my thumb, then tore it once more and slid the pieces into the bin. Not as a gesture, as a practical matter. The apartment had no use for a ledger written by someone who wanted to measure pain. In the hall, I locked the door and checked it twice. Habit, assurance, the act of telling the day that it would not be returning to where it was no longer invited. The elevator took me to the lobby, and the glass doors offered me to the street. The air smelled like bread from the bakery around the corner. Someone laughed outside with the ease of a person who hadn't learned today's lesson yet. A delivery truck idled. A cyclist passed, one hand lightly on the handlebar, the other describing a shape in the air as if explaining something beautiful no one else could see. I stepped out, and for the first time, I did not hear a music box in my head. I heard the city, not louder, not softer, just true. It was enough.